There's a specific kind of exhaustion that doesn't qualify, by any standard you've been given, as something worth saying out loud. You're not in crisis. You're not falling apart. You're showing up. And underneath the showing up, something has been quietly going wrong for a very long time. That experience has a name. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand not just what it is, but why it's been so hard to see, even for you. Most people picture burnout as a collapse, a missed deadline, a breakdown, a moment where something finally gives. That's not what this is. Quiet burnout doesn't look like falling apart. It looks like continuing. It looks like the meeting that runs on time, the deliverable that lands when it's supposed to, the performance review that comes back strong, while something underneath has been slowly, steadily going hollow. The researchers studying this right now are calling it something specific, quietly cracking. And the number attached to it is not small. More than half of the US workforce is currently experiencing it. Not the dramatic version of burnout, but this one. The version that doesn't announce itself. What defines quiet burnout is not the volume of the suffering. It's the gap between the inside and the outside. The output stays high, the performance holds, the calendar stays full, and the responses stay timely. And from the outside, from everywhere outside, everything looks fine. And inside, the exhaustion is a thing that rest doesn't touch. Not the kind of tired that a weekend fixes. The kind that follows you into the weekend and sits next to you while you're supposed to be resting. So what makes this particular exhaustion so invisible to everyone around you and often to yourself? Here's the mechanism. And once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. The performance is not separate from the suffering. The performance is what conceals the suffering. When someone's output drops, when the deadlines start slipping, when the energy becomes visibly depleted, people around them respond. A manager checks in, a partner notices. Someone says, "Are you okay?" That's not what happens in quiet burnout. In quiet burnout, the output doesn't drop. The performance continues, not because everything is fine, but because the person inside it has learned over years, maybe decades, to hold the exterior steady no matter what's happening on the other side of it. And this creates something specific. Because nobody around you is reading distress signals, because there are no distress signals visible from the outside. Nobody checks in. Nobody asks. Nobody pulls you aside with concern. And when nobody checks in, when the people around you continue treating you as someone who is clearly managing, something happens inside the person carrying this. They start to wonder, maybe it's not that bad. Maybe other people feel this way too and just don't say anything. Maybe this is just what adulthood feels like, and the problem is that I'm not handling it well enough. That self-doubt is not a character flaw. It is a direct result of the mechanism. The reason quiet burnout stays hidden is that high performance functions as a one-way mirror. Everyone outside sees someone who's holding it together. The person inside can see both sides and has learned, after enough time, to distrust what they see from the inside because nothing outside confirms it. And what that costs over time is the next thing to name. Here is what happens when suffering goes unwitnessed for long enough. The person carrying it starts to carry it differently, not loudly. That's not available to them. But the weight redistributes. It moves out of the places where it might be seen and into the places that are already private. It shows up as the emotional flatness at dinner. When someone asks how your day was and you say fine, and you mean it, because you genuinely can't locate anything more specific than fine. It shows up in the room with your children, physically there, present by every observable measure, and somewhere else entirely. It shows up on Sunday evenings with a quality of dread that doesn't attach to anything specific, just a low, persistent weight that you've learned to move around because there's nothing else to do with it. And here is the part that this kind of exhaustion does that the louder version doesn't do in quite the same way. It teaches you to override yourself. Because you have been functioning, because the performance is held, because by every external metric you are still ahead, you develop a specific habit of discounting your own interior. The signal comes up. The signal that says, something is wrong. Something is genuinely, specifically wrong. And the response, practiced over hundreds of repetitions, is to note the signal and continue. Because there is no external permission to stop. No one around you is responding as if stopping is warranted. And so you learn, efficiently and thoroughly, to treat your own signals as noise, That is the second wound, not the exhaustion itself, but what the invisibility of the exhaustion teaches you to do with your own internal experience. The exhaustion that rest doesn't touch becomes the experience you've learned to talk yourself out of. And the longer it goes unnamed, the more fluent you become in that specific, private language of self-dismissal. The cost of quiet burnout is not just the exhaustion, it's the slow erosion of trust between you and your own experience. That is what has actually been happening. Not weakness, not poor discipline, not ingratitude, a rational response to a situation where nothing outside you has confirmed that what you're carrying is real. It is real. And you've already been paying for this knowledge for longer than you should have had to. There's a resource in the description built exactly for this moment. Not another thing to add to the list, but a guided process for finally seeing on paper what this has actually cost you, specifically, in your life. Not as self-punishment as clarity, because clarity is where it starts. It's called the real cost inventory, and it's linked below. So what changes when you finally have a name for this? It doesn't fix the exhaustion, it doesn't restructure the schedule, or eliminate the obligations, or hand you back the years that ran on this particular system. What it does is simpler than that. And more important, it interrupts the override. When quiet burnout has a name, when the specific mechanism has been made visible, the signal that comes up is harder to dismiss as noise. Not impossible to dismiss. The habit is strong, and it was built over a long time. But harder, because the dismissal always depended on a particular story running underneath it. This doesn't count. It's not bad enough. Other people handle this fine. I'm managing. And what a name does is put that story in question. You are managing. And managing is not the same as being well. Functioning is not the same as being present. And the absence of a breakdown is not evidence that there is no cost. It is evidence of how long you have been carrying this without anyone around you knowing to look. The exit from quiet burnout does not begin with a dramatic change. It begins with something much smaller and in some ways much harder. It begins with allowing the signal to arrive without immediately overriding it. Not acting on it. Not yet. Not shutting down the work or the obligations or the responsibilities that are real and structural and not going anywhere. Just letting the signal be a signal, letting the exhaustion be exhaustion, without immediately cross-referencing it against the evidence that you're still performing and concluding that it must not be real. That is the first interruption. And it is available right now in your actual life without changing anything else. It doesn't require a different schedule. It doesn't require circumstances you don't have. It just requires giving the thing a name and then choosing, once, not to talk yourself out of it. You've already done the harder part. You clicked on a title that describes something you've never quite found the words for. That's not a small thing. That's the signal refusing, finally, to be silenced. If you want to take what this open and go one layer deeper, the real cost inventory in the description is the first concrete step. Not a course, not a commitment. 20 minutes, a PDF, and finally seeing the specific shape of what this has cost you. When did you first notice the exhaustion wasn't going away? And what were you doing when you realized no one around you could see it? So here's what this video has been about. Not burnout as it's usually described. Not the crash, the breakdown, the moment where the performance fails. The other kind. The kind that lives inside the performance. The kind that makes you good at hiding the cost precisely because you're good at everything else. The kind that stays invisible because the people who would normally notice, who would check in, who would ask, who would respond, have no signal to read. Because you've given them none. Not out of deception. Out of the specific, learned competence of someone who has always found a way to continue. And here's the thing that matters most about having a name for this. The suffering was real before it had a name. The cost was real. The exhaustion was real. The moments of emotional absence, in the rooms with the people you love, in the quiet between deliverables, those were real. The name doesn't create them. The name just ends the part where you had to carry them alone while simultaneously convincing yourself they didn't quite count. They counted. The exhaustion isn't evidence that you're weak. The numbness isn't evidence that you're broken. The fact that no one around you has seen this is not evidence that it isn't happening. It's evidence that you've been running a system that keeps the cost invisible by design, and that you have been paying that cost in exactly the places that no performance review and no productivity metric will ever show up. That system is real. And so is the exit. You already know something now that you didn't know when you clicked. You have a name for it. And the name is where it starts. That's not nothing. That's actually everything.